Okay. Is there anything you can tell me that you've learned so far, anything about the cardiovascular system? Just something that we mentioned in class or something that you wrote down? There are 4 chambers of the heart, and that's because it works as a double circulatory loop. Because what happens is when we talk about intelligent design, if you want to call it that, or just how the man upstairs designed us, when we talk about animals, now comparing animals to humans, fish, is there any reason for them to have a 4-chambered heart? And it has to deal with respiration. So when you talk about respiration between fish and mammals and humans, the obvious difference between them would be what in their respiration? How do fish breathe? Yeah, they breathe with gills. They don't have lungs because there'd be no way for them to take that oxygen in. Then how that has transformed from fish to amphibians when you took the section 1 and 2 years ago in the Devonian period, when it was called before the dinosaurs, when animals started to move onto land. In order to do that, you'd have to have a lung-breathing apparatus, and that's what that hynurpatin did. But when it comes to modern amphibians, going all the way back to the earliest ancestor of amphibians, the hynurpatin, it could breathe on land, but why did it have to stay close to water? It had to have moist skin, for one, because even modern amphibians still breathe through their skin. Then reptiles, that's where we see the first development of a 4-chambered heart. So what we mean by that, okay, is this. So when you look at the heart, it's not going to be very big of even a fish. You're just going to have a vessel that comes out of here. And where would gas exchange possibly take place in a fish? What we just said, which was where? In the gills. So blood can just go from here to the gills. There's fresh oxygen in there. Carbon dioxide is then released at the gills. Then we have oxygen. Then that comes back to the heart. That is just one constant loop because the gas exchange takes place in the gills. It doesn't have lungs yet. Then, again, the way the man upstairs designed it, the heart got a little bigger. Okay. Now we see blood coming out of this bottom chamber, and that is also going to circulate to not gills but lungs because they can still breathe through their skin. And then you would have blood coming back from the lungs into here. No, that's the wrong side. Well, it doesn't matter. That'd still be this side, and then out through the bottom. That is still one loop. Then, the most complex so far, and that's what we've been drawing up on the board. You have a right atrium, a left atrium, a left ventricle, and then a right ventricle. So what that means, blood is coming from rest of body through here. Then it empties down into here. Now it leaves here going to the lungs. So going from the heart to the lungs is which circuit? You got 2 of them. There's 2 circuits we talked about. The pulmonary circuit. So then blood comes from the rest of the body. It leaves here and goes to the lungs. So that's one circuit. Then as oxygen is exchanged with carbon dioxide in the lungs, it comes back to the left atrium. Okay, so blood from lungs. Okay. Then that empties down into the left ventricle, and now we have all this blood that has all this oxygen Where does it leave once it goes out of the left ventricle, do you think? Or you could answer that by which circuit would that be? We've already talked about the pulmonary circuit, the systemic circuit, okay? So then this is the rest of the body, okay? So that's why that's significant. That's why we call it a double loop, because you have blood coming from the rest of the body to the lungs. That's one. From the lungs to the rest of the body, that's two. That's why you have two different loops. All right. So moving forward, we'll look at these models that you have in front of you a little later in the period. Okay, so here we see the atria, left and right upper chambers that receives blood, whether it's coming from the lungs or the rest of the body, just like what we had drawn up here. Here it's coming from the lungs, it's on this side, it's the rest of the body. Okay, the lower chambers are the ventricles, okay, so those send blood away, so that's why they're a little larger. The right ventricle is going to be larger than the atriums, but it only has to pump blood where? Not very far, to the lungs, okay? And then once you get it from the lungs, it has to leave for the rest of the body. It leaves through the left ventricle, and that workload is much higher, so that's why it has to be larger, okay? And then when we talk about a septum, this actually occurs in reptiles quite often, I believe. Notice it says it separates the left side of the heart from the right side, mainly down here in your ventricles. Now, humans can be born with this septal defect, and that's what that means. It's talking about this septum right here. So if infants or even people, if there gets to be a hole developing inside of the heart here, why can that be a problem? Okay, think about that for just a moment. We said, why can that be a problem? And to answer that, what would this tell you in this diagram? If we have a hole in the heart right here, okay, when blood is in this chamber, is there any oxygen in there? Not really. There's probably some, but not as much as what your body actually needs. So what that means is you have some of this deoxygenated blood mixing in with the oxygenated, going back and forth, and that's why that can be catastrophic, or you could say lethal, or something that has to be surgically fixed. All right. Okay. This is why you have that little diagram or that model in front of you, so we can get a better view of these valves, because what you see in the book is just two-dimensional. You see a width and a length, if you want to call it that. Now with a model, you have a length, a width, and a height. So you can see that in 3 dimensions now. And the only reason that I would know this is on my dad's side, I had an aunt that when he married my uncle, when she was growing up, she had rheumatic fever. Now we're talking about the, I suppose, 1940s, 1950s, somewhere in that vicinity when she was growing up. And for some reason, that sickness, if you want to call it that rheumatic fever really causes a problem with this valve, I believe, okay? And for some reason, I believe it maybe it gets weak, if you want to call it that. And a problem that can occur with that is I think you're going to be able to answer this, is when you have blood that is pooling, like for instance, you skin your elbow or your knee on the basketball court or volleyball court, or even some sort of injury, when you see blood being exposed to air or just sitting there, what do you suppose them platelets have to do because they're not moving? What's coagulation mean? They start to stick together. What does that mean? Perhaps. Hardening, clotting, okay? So if you have blood that just pools in one area because maybe this valve is not working, that blood can start to coagulate, okay? And then what can really happen is if that starts to clot and that leaves the heart, it's going to go one of two places, okay? And if it goes to the brain, okay, a blood clot in the brain is called a what? Starts with an S. It's a stroke. That can cause a stroke, okay? Because an aneurysm is just when a blood vessel breaks. But if for some reason it can also go to that of the lungs instead, depends where that blood clot could be. If it's in the right ventricle, a doctor would know, okay, if there's a blood clot in the right ventricle, it's going to go to the lungs. You would know to look in the lungs because it started in the right ventricle. If it's in the left ventricle, well then it can possibly go to the brain, because what's going to happen is that as it reaches the apex, okay, because once that blood leaves this left ventricle, then there's three spots when it goes through this aortic arch. It can either go through this brachiocephalic trunk, okay, which is going to split into a subclavian and axial artery. No, that's not right. To an axillary or a carotid artery. This side is an axillary artery, I think, and a carotid. For some reason, you don't have that balance. There's a brachiocephalic trunk, and that's right here. But that's where blood can send a blood clot to the brain, because as it's traveling through here, it's going to go through the path of least resistance. If there's a hole here, remember, arteries have much, much higher pressure than that of veins do. So chances are it comes through here and then shoots right up through one of these. If it goes through here, it might not end up in the brain, but probably one of these it possibly can. And unfortunately, that can be a problem. Okay. And then this is how we refer to them. If you feel more comfortable with tricuspid and bicuspid, that's fine. But some authors perhaps may refer to that as the mitral valve. And it may make more sense just to keep them separate by saying tricuspid and bicuspid, because when you say tricuspid, okay, that would tell you that it's on the right side. Because if we use the term bicuspid, what letter is missing out of here that's present in this one? So look at tricuspid, and then what letter is missing in here? Kind of like a word search or letter search. Okay? So here's this term, bicuspid. Okay? And then what letter is in here that's not in bicuspid? Say that again. Okay, so you have an R right here. So since this is the tricuspid valve, that would tell you it's on the right side. Okay, So if you're referring to it as the bicuspid valve, oh, well, there's no R in here, so that must be on the left side. Now, I don't know if that's something that would help keep things separate. Like, for instance, and we keep referring to this over and over again, chief cells and parietal cells. Which ones of those secretes the acid? Why? You're right. Okay. You can say, I don't think so. Well, yeah, parietal has a R in it too, but it has an A in there, so you keep the A's together to say, okay, that secretes the acid. Okay? Then this is perhaps pretty straightforward. This is going to be inside the aorta, or this very large artery that you would see here. Okay. I want to do this one. Let's see here, that one I think. Maybe we'll do the path of the blood through the heart. Yeah, we can do that tomorrow. Okay. Because we want to take some amount of time to look at the size of these chambers. I don't think you see, I think these are called Purkinje fibers. I don't know if it has that labeled in your book. But if I remember right, that's what these little structures are called. I know that's a real term, but I can't remember if that's what those are called. But what those valves do, again, is it promotes one-way flow through any type of structure. Okay. Now, I'm trying to use something that would possibly make more sense to you. If we had lots and lots of rain, which unfortunately we don't, okay, there's a way that your house, your parents' house, you build a house or you buy a house, there's about 4 things that will keep water from coming in your basement. Okay, one, okay, probably the most important, have the grade of the house. When we say grade, okay, now I know this is going to be a long explanation. Why are we talking about houses? Yes, I get it, but I will make sense of that. Okay, so when it rains, why is having a high grade sloping away from the house going to keep water from getting in? How does water run? Uphill or downhill? Yeah, it's just going to slope away. That's important. Number 2, do you know what it is that circulates around your house, probably about maybe 3 feet below the surface? It's something that farmers also put inside their fields. It's a structure that's probably about like this big around, So when there's a lot of water that gets in there, it just allows it to go in and it just slopes away. It's a tile system that gets put around the house or inside of a field, for instance. Water can drain in there and it just flows away. That's why you put that around your house. That's number 2. Number 3, you might treat it with a type of chemical that seals that doesn't allow water to come through, because when you look at cement, it's very, very porous. Water can come through there very easily. Okay? And of course, you'd want to have gutters on there too, and that will allow the water to flow away as well. But in that tile system, that drains into a hole that's already cut out, and we call it a sub pump hole. Okay? You probably have one in each one of your basements. I don't know if you know what it is that we're talking about. So a sub pump is just something that will turn on periodically to pump water out of there. And typically what happens is they have what's called a check valve in them. Or if you don't, it would be a good idea to put a check valve in there. Okay? So what that means is this. Okay? Bear with me with my diagram here. Okay? So maybe I should make it a different color. I don't think we need this here anymore, or this. Okay. So here's your sub pump hole, and then there's your sub pump, and then here's your PVC tubing that would go out the side of the house, and you have a hose that's connected that shoots the water out. But in here, it doesn't have a check valve. Those don't automatically come with a check valve. So what that means, it's just a flap like this that can go up. So as water is expelled through this check valve, that dotted line, that flips up. Okay? Once this shuts off again, this dotted line, what's that valve going to do? It's going to go back down. That's a valve. So what that does is it allows water to shoot through here. Then once the sub pump shuts off, the valve closes again. Okay? It only allows it to flow one way. Because if you don't put that check valve in there, water is going to keep shooting up here, and then maybe it stops. If water only gets this far and it shuts off without that valve, what's that going to do? Gravity still works. It comes back down into your hole. Okay, your sub pump turns on again. Water shoots up this high, shuts off, comes back down into your hole. But if you have that check valve in there, it'll turn on and shuts off, then that flap falls down, then you just have that water stuck in the pipe. It doesn't keep circulating through that sub pump hole. Your heart works in a similar manner. Okay? So as your heart is contracting, it's only allowing blood to flow in one direction, very much like this. Okay? So you have 4 of them. Okay? So as we look at this, how do we know, I don't know if you can see my finger through here, how do we know whether this is the bicuspid or the tricuspid? Which one's which? Which is this, the tricuspid or the bicuspid? This one's the tricuspid. Why? Because it's on the right side. Now, I don't know if that's what it is, okay? It's got an R in it, so you know it's on the right side. But if you know this as the mitral valve, that's fine. That's also got an R in it. But that will help keep them separate, okay? You have a tricuspid and a bicuspid, or tricuspid and mitral valve, okay? Then, as you're looking at your models, you might have to tilt them up just a little bit. And when you look at this structure right here, as blood leaves your right ventricle, Okay? It's leaving the right ventricle. Where does it go after it leaves the right ventricle? I just look up there. Yeah, it goes to the lungs. So what we see here, pulmonary means lungs. It's part of the pulmonary circuit. So this here is your pulmonary artery. Okay? Now, what can be misleading is we're pointing at this and we're calling it an artery. Does it have oxygen in it? Probably very little, but is it going to the heart or away from the heart? Yeah, it's going away. So your arteries always carry blood away. Okay? Even though this is blue. Okay? The reason it's blue is because it's going away. It doesn't have any, it has something to do with the oxygen, but don't always think that, okay, this must be a vein here. No, it's an artery because blood is going away from the heart. And then, I don't know how evident that is in your models that you see, but what it is trying to illustrate, I'm trying to see if there's different pages in your book, because for some reason, when you look at this, it's called a semi-lunar valve, and I can't draw in 3 dimensions, but typically, okay, now that probably looks more so like a sickle, but you have this type of a phase when you look up at the night sky. You have one where you can see it's nice and bright. You can see one where it's dark. You can see one where it's like this. These are things that affects the Earth's tide. What affects the Earth's tide? The moon's gravity. So lunar means moon, okay? So that's why this is called a semi-lunar valve, because it reminds, for some reason they call it a semi-lunar valve because it reminded them a phase of the moon, okay? So you have a semi-lunar valve. And this is your pulmonary artery, so that's why it's referred to as the pulmonary semi-lunar valve. Then you would have to maybe tilt your model up like this, because you can't see, just by looking at it, you can't see this pulmonary semi-lunar valve either without tilting it forward. But what that is this very large artery right here is called what? What's this large artery? Yeah, the aorta. That's why it's the aortic semi-lunar valve. Okay. So, let's see here. What did we have on here? Okay. So one way you can look at the structure of the heart, these are known as receivers, okay? In other words, in football, okay, get what you're looking for? Oh, okay. Yeah. So what happens is, what does a receiver do in football? They catch the ball. Well, they're supposed to. Doesn't mean they always do. You're receiving the football and you catch it. That means receiving. It's coming towards you. Okay? Then the left ventricle, those send things away. And what it's saying is, why are these so much larger? Well, it's because of the workload. Where is blood exiting in the senders? In other words, the bottom chambers. The right ventricle. Where is blood going? It's being sent away to where? To the lungs. Okay? Then, as blood is coming back, and then it leaves the left ventricle, okay, where, and this is larger than the right one, but why is the left side larger than the right side? What does this have to do with it? We said the right ventricle sends blood to the lungs. The left ventricle, however, sends blood to where? The rest of the body. So that's why you have the systemic circuit and the pulmonary circuit. All right. So tomorrow we're going to start talking about we'll get to these heart actions and start looking and identifying some of these blood vessels. And there's a lot of them, okay? It's memorization, just like dealing with that of dissecting of the cat. I don't know how else you can look at it. It's memorizing. If you're good at memorizing, hopefully that will be conducive or an advantage to you. And a lot of these vessels, okay, of course can be found, and we'll give you those page numbers because it would be a diagram that looks not only like this with the heart structures on there, you're responsible for that, and the heart itself, but also this one right here, okay? That's delivering blood to the brain. That's one. And then here in the arm, okay, we'll go over that one as well. There's some vessels that we want you to know there. And then also in the leg. And if we're talking about arteries, specific names of arteries, that's going away from the heart. There's probably corresponding ones that brings blood back to the heart. So there's corresponding veins that we'll be going over as well. All right. So any questions going forward then? Okay. Again, it's lots of opportunities, lots of memorizing, but hopefully we're good at that. And we'll refer to that model again tomorrow as blood is traveling through the heart. Okay, we'll catch up to you next time.